Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. It is Superhero Rewind Unscripted, and joining me once again is Austin the Day Ghost.
Aloha, how's it going?
It is time, folks, for part 4 of our impromptu history of superhero movies. We've been doing this for the last couple of months, and it's been, what, 3 weeks since the last... It's been 3 weeks since our last confession, Austin.
It's been 3 weeks since you looked at me, cocked your head to the side and said you're angry.
We've been trying to guess at how long we think this whole thing is going to go. Last time we got up into the mid-2000s, and we're not sure how far we're going to get this time, and if we're going to want to backtrack and talk a little bit more about X-Men, or if Batman Begins is going to come up a little bit more. Any other movies during that period? I think we brushed over some things like Hellboy and Constantine and a couple other movies like that here and there. I
forgot Constantine, yeah.
Yeah. Look, it's Constantine in that movie, okay? Every single person calls him Constantine.
I know, but it's so beat into my head that it's supposed to be Constantine.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard for me not to, like...
Not if you're Keanu Reeves, okay?
Whoa. Exactly.
But yeah, Austin thinks that we'll get... that this video will take... This stream will take us through 4 years. Exactly. It'll be 08 to 2012... And that's about as much as we'll be able to talk about in an hour. We are still timing these. We're talking just an hour about a superhero history going as chronologically as superhero movie history. Oh, good God, that would be a 25,000 part series. We were just talking about superhero history in general.
Mm-hmm.
And
just hell until we get to like the mid-70s. We can talk about Man-Thing, but the rest of it would be hell.
We'll see how far we get. And how many parts it will ultimately take. My guess, did we talk about this on camera? I can't remember. My guess was like 6 parts with maybe an epilogue, kind of speculating about the future.
I don't remember. I feel like I said 10 at one point, but I don't know if that's true or not.
I think I'm wrong. I don't think we can do it in 6.
No.
I think it'll take 7. Or I think MCU by itself is like 2 videos, and that's going to have to cross in and out of DCEU.
It took us 4 videos.
Other things.
It took us 3 videos to hit 2008, and
yeah,
there's like way more ahead of us than there is behind us.
Yeah, that's true. Of individual projects. But the question is, how significant are each of those things where we're going to spend, very much time on each of them? That's the big question.
Well, if we don't have an entire video on Ant-Man and the Wasp, then I don't know what we did wrong.
Are you ready to start the timer, Austin?
Yes, let's do it.
It looks like we might be having a little bit of a buffering thing, so I'm going to on-screen share, if you can live with that.
Oh no, I have to talk to Lord Zed about the history of
superhero movies. Okay, can you handle it?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to press play. We're not actually watching a movie or anything, but I'm going to press play right now. Here we go. So, Austin, I can't remember if we talked about this last time, so apologies if this ends up being a little bit of rehashing. But one thing I wanted to bring up, and I kind of want to open with, is we're in a period where reboots are kind of a novel, somewhat new idea. Obviously, there's been lots and lots of remakes of movies, but the idea of a brand new franchise that replaces an old franchise that doesn't start with the exact same story, just retold, is kind of new, and superhero movies help to pioneer that. They're not the only things, of course, that are doing that, but Batman Begins is a real big like first outing with that whole thing, and then Star Trek '09 will do it a few years later.
And Planet of the Apes is, I think, the first place where we coined that, but I could be wrong.
Oh, is it really? Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that.
I want to say that because I want to say there was a lot of talk about like this is not a remake, this is something else, but I could be wrong about that.
Are you talking about the
Tim Burton movie?
The prequel franchise?
No, the Tim Burton movie.
Okay. Because that's interesting because it's still Planet of the Apes is just telling the story differently.
Mm-hmm. No, it changed a lot of details, but I think that's like the start of kind of moving us towards that.
The whole reboot idea instead of remake. That is still, especially because they didn't make any more, that is still closer to a remake than an actual franchise reboot. And then the whatever was intended, and then the prequel series after that is an honest to God reboot. And then of course Bond is going to do that real hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
At the end of the decade. And I just wanted to kind of put a pin in that and bring that up because we're about to get that with Spider-Man in the early 2000s or the early 2010s, and people are going to get kind of confused about it with Batman. Because folks were unaccustomed to that. So I remember, and I've told this story before, but I remember going to the theater and hearing people really confused because the backstory that they were getting, and keep in mind that we had not had a Batman origin film yet. So I think the title Batman Begins confused people because that sounds like a prequel to I don't know if I've thought about this. Batman Begins sounds like a prequel to a franchise that you've been watching.
Well, not only that, but Batman Begins sounds like the kids, like little booklet. Like, they sell those little kids books for superhero movies where it's like,
yeah,
Batman and his friends or whatever. It sounds like one of those where it's like, Batman '89 came out. You can buy Batman Begins. This is how Batman began.
See how this whole thing started. Yeah. And so people are like, well, these events clearly contradict what happens in '89. They caught Joe Chill. Joe Chill murdered Batman's parents. What happened to the Joker? All of that. And that sounds like quaint and weird now. But I remember having to explain this to adults, a lot older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really weird, funky, different time. And now this is an idea that we're very, used to and familiar with. And anytime something doesn't work out, we're just waiting for it to get rebooted again.
Mm-hmm. Well, who it was especially awkward for is 10-year-old me who watched the Dark Knight trailer and thought that Joker was Jack Nicholson in it, even though he's clearly not. But I remember seeing the trailer for the first time. I remember I was sitting at my mom's computer and I saw it, and I emailed my mom, and because that was when I first got email, and I was like, there's like a new Batman movie, and they have the old Joker guy. He's back in it.
So I wanted to just kind of bring that up real quick as we're moving forward because I couldn't remember if we really dealt with that. But you have Begins, and that is one of the big, obviously memorable, important superhero movies retroactively, but as we talked about last time, didn't make a lot of bank at the box office. And Superman Returns, I think we discussed last time, did about the same or better, even though it didn't end up getting a sequel, and people don't care for that movie looking back on it at this point. And we talked a lot last time about how Marvel was casting a wide net, trying a lot of different things, a bunch of separate franchises made by different companies, and DC really just had Batman, tried a Superman, that didn't work. They did Watchmen in '09. They did a lot of things based on indie comics or Vertigo things, more adult stuff, like Constantine. and they're kicking around the shared universe idea right around when Marvel starts doing it. I think it's important to note that they were already considering something like that even before it was a clear done deal that MCU was going to be really popular and the next huge thing that everybody has to go see at the box office. Because when Justice League Mortal, and I know I'm kind of getting ahead of us, but when they start putting that together, that's what? 09, 2010? Or is it even a little bit earlier than that?
I thought it was earlier, but I'm not.
Maybe that's even 08 that they start casting that, and that's not them trying to get ahead. Now that Marvel's got a shared universe, they don't know if the Iron Man thing is going to pan out. I don't even know if they know that the competition is trying to build a huge shared universe at that point. I don't think they're thinking about that. I think just both companies are looking that direction at the same time, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sense that I got, especially because they were already trying to do the Batman and Superman movie way before this. So I think it was just a natural course to go eventually.
Yeah, I know we kind of hammered this home real hard last time, and I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but the notion of a shared universe was not new to fans or studios. General audiences that weren't aware that these characters crossed that much or just didn't think that with rights issues and stuff it was necessarily feasible were surprised when it finally started happening with the MCU. But this was something that people like me were kind of impatient about all through the 2000s. Why can't Daredevil and Spider-Man and X-Men, et cetera, all be in the same universe? It's kind of ridiculous that they're all separated. Is what my teenage brain, teenage to early adult, comic book fan was kind of screaming into the ether, where it's like this all in a way it still felt like, even though it was to me at that time, like I always say, the new onslaught of superhero movies, or like the first onslaught, it also felt kind of quaint and baby steps, where it's like, surely at some point some of this stuff gets to cross, right?
Yeah, if you know,
because Stan Lee created just this mess of rights throughout different studios.
No, a complete disaster. They're lucky that they had as much as they did when they did finally start.
Oh yeah, it could have been really lame. And like we talked about before, it could have been, well, we've got Daredevil and we've got Ghost Rider and
the MCU.
There's the MCU, yeah. Got Elektra. They had one more, right?
Fox? Or who? Sorry.
Yeah, Fox. Well, and now I'm trying to remember. Did Fox make Ghost Rider?
No, that's Sony.
Oh, that's right.
We could have had an MCU that was Spider-Man and Ghost Rider.
The reason I always get tripped up on that is because Mark Steven Johnson made both of those movies.
No, that's understandable.
And I'm always thinking, like, well, Daredevil was successful enough, so they gave him another one. Well, they hired that guy because he did a Marvel thing that was successful enough. I guess that's what happened.
Well, that's apparently just the Sony way, because they replaced their I don't know if it was like I don't think it was CO, just whoever is on top of all that stuff, with Tom Rothman, who was the head of Fox during the period we're talking about, because he was one of the guys that was the head of that stuff at Fox during Origins.
This is an interesting comment, and I want to know if you agree with it. Daniverse, live in the comments, and welcome everybody watching live. Thanks for being here. Says Marvel not having their big names is why they succeeded. You can see Warner Brothers and DC and see they've been struggling with non-Batman characters. Do you overall agree or disagree with that?
I mean, I think it definitely helped. But I think it's more so because it's weird, right? Because they had the Avengers, who are big, but just not really in public consciousness at that point. Like, they had characters that were big enough, I think.
Yeah, it's not like people didn't know who Iron Man was, but that's not
the Avengers
definite surefire hit. Say again.
And the Avengers is the perfect thing to link, because that's the characters who had their own books and then were put into a team.
Yeah, but if what he's saying is maybe they wouldn't have even gone that direction and they would have crossed things really differently if they had started with the huge popular iconic things already. Like, if they had Spider-Man in their pocket at that time, what does the MCU look like? Like, is it possible that you end up with, you know, a successful Spider-Man franchise, but you have a hard time getting anything else off the ground? Is it possible that you rush stuff just because you've got, just because you've got a character that's known as like an individual hero, and then you have all these Avengers characters, and you're like, well, people want to see the big popular guy, so we get Spider-Man in the Avengers too early. But like the MCU already sort of did that, and it didn't really hurt them or anything. So like, I'm not sure what it would have done if they had everything under the house at the same time.
I mean, it definitely wouldn't have been as focused on the Avengers,
right? But that's not to say that it wouldn't have still been a massive success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows?
Because I think something like Rise of the Silver Surfer could have been huge had it been a better movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I've always said it's a mistake to say Fantastic Four and Silver Surfer, you know, and Fantastic Four obviously did well enough in 04 to get, or was it 05, to get a sequel. But
04, I think, or maybe 05.
But if that movie, that's just a missed opportunity if you didn't release that in 04.
I think it's 04 because I think Silver Surfer's 06 or 07.
But I think it's a mistake to go, you know, those failed because nobody's going to care about movies made of those characters. If we made, let's say, you know, none of that happened. Just be real crazy speculative for a second. This was the question anyway. We're going to speculate. Let's say that Fantastic Four and Silver Surfer never happened, Austin. Mm-hmm. And the MCU still somehow comes together exactly the way it did, but they had the rights reverted back to Marvel Studios. And in phase 1 or 2, they're able to make either the Fantastic Four or Silver Surfer or both. Those are much different movies than the way the Marvel will make them and is going to make them now. And there's every reason to think that they could have been as good and well received as Captain America or Avengers or even Thor.
Mm-hmm. They also would have been way smaller movies.
Yeah, that's true.
I could go either way. With Fantastic Four and Silver Surfer.
Plushy DX says, I think Marvel Studios might have been able to succeed if it was more Spidey and X-Men focused. I think so too. Like, just because history worked out the way it did doesn't mean that there's not a parallel history where it's just as successful with different kinds of properties. I mean, keep in mind how huge the Spider-Man movies were. Eventually the MCU was able to even surpass that with the Avengers movies and having these, you know, huge tentpole projects with a bunch of characters all thrown together, but they still could have made something like that, and they still had the Avengers characters, so it probably would have just looked different. But I think it's possible that they still would have had, you know, billion-dollar franchises on their hands.
Yeah, I wonder if it maybe would have looked less homogenized if we had FF and X-Men, where it's like, you know, not everything has to be Avengers, and Avengers movies could have just been Avengers movies.
Yeah, it could have actually helped them in the long run, even if they didn't make as much money early on. Mm-hmm. Where they get away from the superhero formula earlier. Or where every movie, I shouldn't say it that way, where every movie doesn't get to the point where it kind of is in a, you know, meat grinder, where people complain about this all the time now, where too many of them feel like they're following the same formula and they're just kind of baked in a factory, and there's a assembly line. Mm-hmm. You know, where they can feel like they're parts of, you know, different parts of the universe, and maybe give you a different flavor of it, like the Netflix Marvel shows did, but on the big screen.
Mm-hmm. Well, then of course was, you know, all the pro matter and like stuff like that too. Who knows with any of that?
No, that's true. Yeah, the rivalries between producers held the studio back in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Plush DX says Iron Man had a deleted post-credit scene where Fury talks about a bunch of stuff that Marvel Studios didn't own the rights to. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Which was an awful scene.
Yeah, it is, and it's very strange. Like, did they think that the rights were going to revert back and so? Like, why would they do that? I never understood that.
Correctly, I think there was like talks that they were trying to talk with the other studios to link up like what they did with Sony.
Yeah, but I wouldn't think that you would want to make any reference to it unless you knew for sure it was going to work out. Because it's Hollywood. Those kind of deals are hard to make. And they got to know that.
Yep. Yeah, that's why they cut it.
So anyway, let's stop talking about what might have happened.
Talk about what actually happened.
Talk a little more about what actually happened. So Austin, why don't you get us started with? Well, actually, sorry. Before we get to the year that changed everything with 2008,
it changed things.
There's
no going back.
I've only used that quote to make this point like 115,000 times in videos. Austin, looking through, this will be the last big point I want to make about this Growing Pains period. Looking through the 2000s with the X-Men movies, with the smaller kind of standalone Marvel things, the 2-movie Fantastic Four franchise, etc., would you say we had more or fewer like well-received superhero movies?
As compared to like right after, you mean, or
no? I just mean ratio-wise. Like, were there more well-liked movies or less well-liked movies overall? Because during that period,
I'm gonna say less.
Yeah, I think so too. But it didn't feel like that as it was going on. Is kind of the point I'm trying to make. Is that like while I was there, it felt like a renaissance, but the real renaissance was a decade later.
Well, it felt like a renaissance because we were just getting more of them. But I do feel like because you had your Spider-Mans, but for every Spider-Man there was, a Fantastic Four or a Daredevil.
But I think it's important
Elektra.
to note too that a lot of us weren't. The internet was different. A lot of us weren't chronically online, and a lot of us weren't paying that much attention to even professional reviewers. So if you went to a theater and saw a movie and liked it, you weren't necessarily thinking that much about how successful it was unless you heard box office numbers and it just completely tanked. And a lot of those movies that we look back on now not as fondly still did, for the time, decently well. Like, I think there's fewer duds and bombs than we make it out to be. Like, when you say, for every Spider-Man there's a Fantastic Four, but it got a sequel.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean financially. I just meant, like, in terms of whether people liked it or not.
Yeah, okay, sure. But I guess I'm just thinking more at the time as opposed to retroactively, because I also think that by and large, and this is, I think, a really important note, pardon the plumbing, this is, I think, a really important note that we were, on the whole, especially superhero fans that have been waiting for some of these things to finally get big screen adaptations, we just weren't as critical as we are of it now.
No, I mean, there was definitely an aspect of eat the slop you get because it's all you're getting.
Yeah.
But
and decent movies looked like great movies. We talked about this a lot with Spider-Man 2. Like, that is still a movie I like, but, like, it looked like a masterpiece in 2004 in a way it doesn't to me now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, Spider-Man 2, I would say, is, the 89 of my generation.
Yeah.
Where, like, it's good, but it's not that good. Like, it's better at the time that it came out compared to what else was coming out, but...
Yeah, I mean...
It's definitely held up by nostalgia.
You could say that about the first movie, that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is the 89 of your generation, but the difference is Returns isn't great. And Spider-Man 2 is for a lot of people a better movie than the first Spider-Man. Although these days I don't even know if I completely agree with that. But
no, I've always preferred the first Spider-Man to the second one. That was a movie I didn't really like as a kid. Like, it was...
Oh, interesting.
It was on, but...
Yeah.
but
But
I
you see
love
what I'm saying?
the
Like,
three.
it was just so exciting to finally get those movies, and some of them were better than we expected them to be because the previous decade, uh, you didn't get very much, and when you did, very often we didn't get enough money thrown at it, and
Hmm.
all you're comparing it to with the '90s is the Batman movies.
Yeah, exactly,
So
and
you know,
maybe
when the last
Superman.
thing in recent memory is Batman and Robin, besides Blade and X-Men, of course,
Hmm.
then everybody's going, well, I mean, it's better than that. You know, and so yeah, you do get those like major kind of cows. Like you get those terrible things that everybody hates unanimously at the start, like Catwoman. Hulk was not well liked at the time. That's been a little bit reappraised by people, but like it didn't perform. So you know, there's definitely exceptions, but like by and large, I think, and you know, like Elektra, people didn't care for it because we didn't get a successful female-led superhero movie until 2017.
Yeah, and there's also the Man Thing movie in that period, which is the worst comic book movie ever made. It's so bad.
I think that actually may be the worst comic book movie ever made.
I think on an objective level, it is the worst comic book movie ever made. Feel free to disagree with me. You're wrong.
Well, and I like that you couch that as comic book movie because there are maybe
Even broader, yeah.
well, what I was gonna, well, but you've also narrowed it to a degree.
Fair enough.
It's definitely one of the worst adaptations I've ever seen. There are probably original superhero movies that are worse than that. You don't think so? Even that?
No, I think it's the worst one in superhero and comic book. I don't
I
think there's
can't
anything
wait to
worse
finally
than
do
that.
a commentary with you about that.
It's a Sci-Fi Channel original movie. It's so bad.
Was it actually originally released on Sci-Fi Channel? Okay, and Daniver said that
It's
too,
not, but
well, he says it was Sci-Fi Channel, so I barely count it. Here's the thing, what I'm remembering for the 5 minutes of cursory research I did about that movie at one time. I've never reviewed it, but I did a blind commentary on it years and years ago with Eric. What I'm remembering is that movie was actually made to go theatrical, and they decided not to release it because it was so bad. Yeah, so it does count because it was made to go theatrical.
No, that is what happened. But it looks like a sci-fi original movie.
Well, and it sounds like retroactively maybe it was, which is really amusing. Anyway, why don't you get us started then, Austin, in the year that changed things?
Okay, so there was a movie. It was called Iron Man, and then it came out, and everything changed. Iron Man came out first, right? I'm pretty sure
I
it did.
believe it did. Yeah.
Because if I remember correctly, I was still in school when Iron Man came out, and then Dark Knight came out in the summer.
Yeah, and really kind of blindsided everybody because the anticipation was for Dark Knight, and it was like the second coming of Christ. Like even at that point, like it was '89 all over again, and it's crazy. By the way, looking back through the years before this, how often this has happened with Batman. Where the whole world seems to shut down over a new Batman release, and we kind of keep forgetting that it's happened before. And it didn't happen for Begins, but it happened with '89, and I mean, in some ways, in the biggest way because nobody expected that at all. And with the merchandising and all of that, like '89 created in some ways, or at least it helped to really pronounce it, the merchandising juggernaut that these things are now. But it happened with Batman Forever. And I think people sometimes forget about just how big that movie was. It wasn't to the same degree as '89, but it was close, which was a surprise. And then Dark Knight was a whole different level because it wasn't just kids and families at that point. That felt like a big cultural moment for, and '89 was too, but like, that felt like auteur film director making this huge important comic book movie that we kind of all forgot was even based on a comic book. Where at that point it was just this is the film to see. It's a big deal, and like it was very commercial, but it also felt real artsy to everybody. And it was Second Coming of Christ, I think. But people didn't forget about Iron Man. They just didn't expect a lot from it, I don't think.
No, it was just another one of those, and it kind of took everybody by storm.
Because it was so much. I'm talking about Iron Man now. Because it
Mhm.
was so much uh, smarter and more of a crowd pleaser for everybody under the sun than any of the stuff that you'd had in the previous decade.
And I
Even
also
even
think it
over something
helps.
like X2, which didn't really feel like it was for everybody. Like Iron Man kind of brought everybody together in a way nobody expected it to, and then Dark Knight brought everybody together, but everybody expected that because they were anticipating it. And so it was this weird one backwards 1-2 punch.
hmm No, and I think one of the big things too is that just like Dark Knight, Iron Man has a level of realism that I don't think we really saw. And like, obviously, that's not like realistic in the same way that Dark Knight is trying to be. But when you have, like all the stuff in like Afghanistan and whatnot, like it didn't look like anything we were seeing in superhero movies at that point.
No, the irony is as down to earth or grounded, where we can't get away from when we talk about the Nolan movies, as Dark Knight purported to be, it is the more stylistic of those two movies. Of Dark Knight and Iron Man.
Um, I don't know. I don't know if I can pick one between the two as being more stylized.
Well, I'm gonna say that just because like I mean we can argue about it. I
Yeah.
didn't even really mean this as an opinion thing. Like I couldn't tell you if Afghanistan exists in the Dark Knight universe. You know what I'm saying? Like I with
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but
with the
fair enough.
well that's true too because they've
Because I
got
don't have any of that with
because
Dark Knight.
they go to Japan and all that. That's true.
Yeah. No, I think Dark Knight is the thing that completely wipes it away from being a stylized Batman.
Well, from being as from being as heightened as the world I thought we were in with Begins was, but it still doesn't feel like exactly the world we live in, and I think Iron Man absolutely wants to be the world we live in.
I see. I think Dark Knight more so. Iron Man is definitely part of that, but I think it's just like concept, right? Like it's just because the Iron Man suit itself is so outside of real world that it nudges it over more.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to spend the whole time just having debate about that.
hmm
I and we'll move on in a second, but I will also say
They're
I
also both very post
you
9/11
could
superhero movies.
yes, but what I was going to say is you could make the case with stuff in Dark Knight also where like nobody that had the condition Two Face did could like exist and live like that, looking like
I
that.
I
That makes it
agree,
feel
but
more
that takes
heightened.
I agree, but I don't think that works in that movie. Like that is one of the things that I think is
Well,
going against
regardless of
the
whether
rest
you
of that
think it
movie.
works, they did it, and you can see, and
Mhm.
you never get anything like that in MCU.
I mean, we've definitely done stuff like that.
Have we?
Yeah, I even like High Evolutionary is what Two Face is, but the whole face.
Well, okay, but before we go to space, do we ever do anything like that? Like,
Um, I don't know. We go to space like two movies or three movies in,
well, anyway,
or
I don't know. Like in the theater, I felt like I was in a different world with Dark Knight, and with Iron Man, I felt like that is a Marvel universe that is really wanting to be set hip deep in the world that we're in already.
hmm no, we definitely have that, but in the way that Marvel is, um, we're like it's still very Marvel, I think. Uh, while DC is always like the one that's more outside of reality, and Dark Knight takes it to Chicago.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of like full on references to real world events and things in Dark Knight like you get in Iron Man and Beyond.
Maybe, yeah, but I also think part of it's just it's so rooted in that period as well, even if we're not directly mentioning things.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. That I don't know. It's a perspective thing.
hmm yeah, I didn't think this would be the thing that we argued about.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm just speaking in the moment. What's coming to me, I guess. I don't
yeah,
know.
no,
Like
no,
you might be
you're
right
not
about that.
lying. That's how you feel.
But anyway, um, So yeah, those two movies, obviously, and we've talked about this 1,000 times on the channel, get a lot of regular people, just movie goers that aren't already into comics and stuff, suddenly caring about properties based on comic books more, and being a little bit maybe more open to uh, seeing adaptations of things they wouldn't have cared about before, or would have thought were silly. And Austin, how much of the global relative global acceptance of like nerd culture, geek culture, that kind of thing, can we attribute to the popularity of those two movies?
I mean, it's definitely the start of it. I think obviously
Was some of it already happening a little bit though?
Not like in my experience, like as a kid, like it was the same as it always was. Like people liked The Dark Knight, but it wasn't, Batman and Robin swinging from ropes through, a really out there Gotham City that made people go like, oh yeah, like comic book stuff's cool.
Yeah.
Because the big thing I remember hearing about was, oh man, Dark Knight's really good. Like they completely throw out like the stupid like superhero costume. He's wearing military gear. So like I think stuff like that, and then Iron Man, like, it's a big mech suit and not like that kind of superhero costume. So, but that was my experience. Like,
yeah, that's a good point too. That, and I think there's this shift that happens where it starts from let's make these things more realistic, and then the longer people stay in these things, the more they're probably, at least the folks that stick around and keep watching them, they're accepting the goofier stuff, right? The sillier things. They start embracing the things that, they start embracing the things that us comic fans were already enjoying and specifically liked about them. We wanted them to not necessarily be realistic. We liked the escapism. We liked the absurd, impossible nature of it. There were conceits that we were giving it that people in 1989 had a hard time even giving Batman and the Joker before they saw that movie, right? Mm-hmm. And so with that's a terrific point you made, that we started with two movies that were very post 9/11, that had things to say about military industrial complex and about the war on terror. Both of those movies are dealing with some of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Interesting that one is more about domestic terror and the other is more about foreign. Because those are both issues we're dealing with all at the same time right then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to mention, privacy issues and that kind of thing too. Mm-hmm. With the kind of forced in phone thing at the end of Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then Marvel will do that aspect of it later with Winter Soldier.
Because how much of this is, I don't know, superficial is not the right word, but more about the physical trappings of it than how sophisticated the stories are. Because I always think of it as, Iron Man and Dark Knight are just smarter superhero movies. They're more character-driven. They're about flawed, real people that you come to care about, that you actually buy in their respective universes, put on costumes, and go try to fight crime, and they're not perfect people. And how much of it is, to your point, it's not just that they're good, well-told stories and that they get away from formula, but some of it is simply they make it feel more like the world that we live in than we had before. I maybe have not, before talking to you about this, given that aspect of it enough credit.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely part of it. I think in terms of character, like you said, I would give that more to Iron Man than Dark Knight, because Dark Knight, the big thing is
Begins already did it. That's the thing, is that
Bruce Wayne gets really lost in Dark Knight, but that's like the Joker's movie.
Yeah, and as you said, I'm starting to come to your side more on this, because as you said earlier, like Begins feels like a more heightened world than Dark Knight gets you to. As somebody mentioned, well, I mean, Dark Knight is just Chicago, and Begins, like, they built things. There's some on location shooting with that too, but most of Gotham is is built inside of a big warehouse.
Yeah, well, Begins is weird because it's like it's Chicago, but then it's got like this heightened aspect of it. It's just the middle with the narrows.
Yeah. But that movie happens 3 years before that and did not set the world on fire the way Dark Knight did. And I've always said this, a lot of people went into Dark Knight either forgetting or not realizing or not caring that that was even a sequel to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm convinced that Dark Knight for the mass populace was not a sequel.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was like, as a kid, like I'd seen Begins a few times before Dark Knight came out, but I didn't really hear about that from people.
Yeah.
It's just circles you grew up in, right?
Sure. And I mean, like, I'm an adult and 2 years away from getting married, and I'm telling you, everybody talking about it in my circles around me, some of them saw Begins, but everybody was excited about it, whether they'd seen that or not. There were people I knew for sure never saw that movie. That it was all about the look of the Joker. It was all about the trailers. It was all about finally doing that character again and in a way different, in a totally different way. And it looked like a big, scary crime thriller, which I think people didn't expect to ever see from Batman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. No, and you have the kind of change that we'd seen more in comics at that point, but we were getting for the first time on film with the change from the silly supervillain thing to more of like a terrorist.
Yeah, and Marvel was doing a lot of that in the early to mid 2000s.
Mm-hmm. When we just talked about that with Extremis.
Yep. Well, I was going to say just the Marvel Knight stuff in general.
Yeah,
that's what it was kind of all about. And
that was the peak of Marvel villains with like leather jackets and no shirt.
Yeah, were there really any terrorist villains in superhero movies through the 2000s before you get to 2008? I mean, you could say Ra's al Ghul in Begins is a terrorist, but like still of a very comic booky kind of ilk. Like he's still sort of wearing a costume, like.
When I would say it's less that because he's just wearing like a suit, but it's more that they're all like ninjas.
Yeah. I just mean they give us a fake Ra's al Ghul at the beginning that's wearing a costume. When you go into that movie, you think it's a costumed villain, I guess is what I'm saying. But...
Okay, I thought you meant Liam Neeson. But yeah,
no, you're right. He's not really wearing a costume. He's just wearing a suit.
But when the city gets invaded by ninjas, it's a little different than placing bombs everywhere. With like your Joker masked people and stuff.
Fella says, I'm not cut up, but it's so weird to act like Raimi's Spider-Man only holds up because of nostalgia. Anyone who's serious about filmmaking as an art considers them better than anything in the MCU.
I mean, I agree with that in terms of the filmmaking style. I just think they're really sloppy scripts.
Yeah,
and I don't love the cast.
And more formulaic than the two movies we're talking about right now, at the very least.
No, in terms of like cinematography and just how those movies look, it's some of the best in the genre, absolutely.
I'm not going to say better than anything in the MCU, but I don't know how to compare something like, I mean, the very heightened, trying to look more like a 60s, Stan Lee comic than anything, Ditko comic than anything, to Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well,
there's some excellent filmmaking in that movie, and
in terms of just how it looks, I mean, Raimi blows both of the two reboot franchises out of the water. But I like Homecoming a little bit more.
Yeah,
just I like the story.
It all comes down to story for me. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like Tom Holland more in that role than I like Tobey.
Yeah, you and I are in.
But in terms of like,
I think live action wise, Homecoming is still the best Spider-Man movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like for me, it's like that, and then the first two Raimi movies. Absolutely. I feel like there is a perfect Spider-Man movie that is a melding of those three films.
Oh sure. Yeah, well, and it hurts my feelings that we never got, uh, in my opinion anyway, better than Homecoming, and that is such a setup movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like part of why I loved it was I was excited about where it seemed like we were going. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Pros and Cons guy just put in a $5 super chat and says, I think
Yeah.
the problem with Marvel movies is trying too hard to be funny. Look at Thor: Love and Thunder. Well, and that happens as it goes along, and you're getting a little bit ahead of us with that. But I'll speak to it for a second. And thanks for the super chat. And I'll say it's interesting that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we can ground this into exactly where we are because we're starting with Iron Man, which
that's what I was about to. Yeah.
Which is a movie that I think of as 3 different movies, like in terms of acts and its tone, where you have like a very dark first act where he's in Afghanistan and he's in the cave and all that stuff, and then your second act is very slapsticky and comedy driven, and then your third act is superhero movie.
Yeah, that's true, and then we can go back and kind of compare it to Dawn of Superman again.
Mm-hmm. Because that was some of the stuff.
Because it doesn't feel. Because when you say that, it doesn't sound like a criticism. Are you criticizing it for that?
No, not at all. That was the thing I loved about it as a kid. Was it was like, oh man, like this is like really dangerous in the first act, and then the second act, I was like, oh, this is all really fun. Like I love Downey fighting with his robotic arms.
Yeah, it still feels.
All that stuff's great.
Yeah, it feels of a piece still.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Dawn of Superman did. It's just different stages of a man's life, really. I mean, more condensed, obviously, than.
Well, I think what helps is
the Superman thing.
When he goes back to Afghanistan, it like reverts back to that tone. So it's like, this is the tone of him working on things. This is the tone of when he's dealing with, bad guys.
It works because you're through his lens, right? Mm-hmm. So it isn't that the world itself keeps changing tones.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the movie is shifting its tones when it's appropriate for what the character is going through. So when the character's having a great time, you're having a great time too. And then, like you said, when he goes back to Afghanistan and we're back in that war zone, well, it's not like the place has changed.
Well, and that's one of the best moments of the MCU.
Or his feelings of it, yeah, or about it, yeah.
Is that whole scene where they're like raiding the town and then Iron Man lands down. Like that to me is one of the best moments in the MCU that I don't know if it's ever really been topped.
Yeah, that's a good call. I see what Fella's saying now. This is the problem trying to communicate through text, I think. He says, it's not even really a debate. I could leave my opinions out of it. I'm just saying anyone who's a serious cinephile would be, and I'll never call myself that, but yeah, would be more interested in Raimi's Spider-Man films than the John Watts stuff. I thought when he said than anything in the MCU, he meant anything in the MCU. Yeah, he's talking about Spider-Man. Well, I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean...
Or at least I agree that those are more visually interesting than the John
Both
Watts
of the reboot franchises have studio hack directors.
Yeah. No, of course. Well, I think Webb is less hacky.
We'll get there.
Okay. Well, I've never seen anything else he's made.
Mm-hmm. No, I have major issues with his directing, but...
Oh, do you? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we won't review these movies as
we get to them. We'll probably get there when we
he's talking about the commentary when we get to that. But anyway,
Noah says, can you imagine if there were goofy slapstick jokes in the cave section?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So going back to that whole point, thanks for getting me back on track there, Noah. So when Pros and Cons guy brought up that MCU tries to be too funny, it's ironic that we got to that place where, it feels like the whole kind of cynical market research thing, where it's like, what are the things that people are responding to with our movies? We gotta, make sure we've got a dash of this and a pinch of that instead of just writing movies. Like it felt like we were doing more of in the first couple of phases anyway. But it's ironic, as I say, because we opened with a movie that was largely improvised with an unfinished script where they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants through a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And it's very much the kind of filmmaking that you had with Love and Thunder, but it worked because they knew they weren't just making a goofy slapstick movie. It wasn't the Ghostbusters 2016 thing where it was whatever we could do to get a laugh. It was whatever we can do to get this story told, which is a very different approach. Like all the way through, Favreau is trying to tell a story. He's trying to make a drama, but he's got actors, particularly with Downey, of course, that are really good comedic actors as well as dramatic actors, and that's a character that at least with the narcissistic direction they decided to go with him, where he's really full of himself, it made sense to play with those comedic sensibilities, and he's more believable because he makes up so much of what he says on the spot. You cannot turn that into a formula, a filmmaking approach for a whole studio. You could maybe make it a filmmaking approach for that franchise, potentially. You still have to be really careful for it not to get stale and for you to lose yourself and just make it about telling jokes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely.
But sometimes I think that studio kind of forgets that they're a studio. You know what I mean? Because like studios make different kinds of movies, and they look at it as a franchise, and like it is and it isn't. I know I've talked about this a lot, but like that's where we ultimately got to, is these things all have to have these components that have all worked for us before, and if you don't keep taking risks and shaking things up, it's gonna get stale, and it's gonna get stale for you, the filmmakers. So even if what you're doing would work forever, you can't possibly maintain the quality of it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, they made a house style. You go back to like early Marvel, when Stan Lee's forcing everyone to try to be Jack Kirby, but the difference is that movies have way more people involved. And it's a way bigger like production
collaboration.
Two people making a comic.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, Iron Man's improvised to the point where like the villain changed partway into filming that movie, which
because it was supposed to be the Mandarin, right?
Yeah, which is something that we knew about for a long time, but it I guess maybe just came out in the Reign of the MCU book that part of the reason why they changed it was because of reaction to movies like Spider-Man 3 with the whole too many villains complaint.
Oh, interesting. And
but
sometimes
the idea
it does.
Originally was supposed to be that Stain was the villain of 3, like he would be like the overarching villain of a trilogy, and that's what they signed Jeff Bridges on for.
Oh wow.
And then partway into filming, they were like, yeah, you're the main villain now. And I think that's why there is an element of it kind of degenerating in the third act to just...
You could see something is missing there. Something's kind of amiss, because it's a little bit too easy when he just sort of presents himself like, yeah, I've been behind all of this. You're like, I'm pretty sure you could have just stayed a secret.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they stuck to their original plan, you probably don't get all the goofiness in the third act where it does kind of drop into just a standard goofy superhero fight.
Yeah, no, I definitely have always wondered what that movie looks like if the Mandarin's the main villain, and would he be like present in those camp scenes or those cave scenes,
and how heightened does that stuff get?
Yeah, I don't know. And would we have made him Middle Eastern?
Because they are... Because at that point, when you're just looking at Iron Man, I think it's really difficult to separate ourselves from the 32 movie history. And forget that at that time, we couldn't possibly know how off the page or not off the page they would be willing to or allowed to go with stuff. So when we say the Mandarin was supposed to be the main villain in that, does he have the 10 rings? Are they magical? Where do they come from? What do they do?
Yeah, that's the other big thing.
You don't know. Magic could have been introduced in Iron Man. Mm-hmm. You don't know.
But
probably not. But it could. But it could have.
Because we're also in that period where we're still a little afraid to say names. Like, we get the name drop of Ironmonger, but he's not going to be called Ironmonger.
Yes, but couldn't they have been ambiguous about it? Couldn't they have had the rings and they had powers and they did stuff? Like, do you think... Here's the thing. They're making a movie where they shoot a scene for after credits, and obviously this sets the precedent forevermore with the after credits thing. Let's make a note of that with the history, because we can't get away from that for worse or worse. But I can't even say better or worse with that, because that was... There's some fun after credits things, but for the most part, that has not been a great legacy, a great precedent that we set, right? Because so many of them, even when they were cool after credit scenes, they would be things that we kind of, reneged on later. And we thought it was setting up something that we, changed our minds about later. Or the ending of a movie that you need for the whole movie to work as a piece is thrown at the end of the credits after 2/3 of your audience has walked out of the theater. I hate that. But anyway, the point I was going to make is, you, like somebody alluded to earlier, you shot a scene where you've got Nick Fury talking about people with superpowers. Isn't it possible that the Mandarin would have had rings with powers and they just would have been ambiguous as to where they came from, and we'd later on explain that? They seemed a little bit timid about stuff, and you're right about the name thing and all of that. Like, they seemed like, well, we're gonna have S.H.I.E.L.D., but we haven't decided exactly what the history of that is, how far back it goes.
Yeah, because in the first Iron Man, it's very much like a new thing. And then we'll retcon later on that it's been around since like right after World War II.
We retcon it very quickly.
Yeah.
Even by Iron Man 2, I get the feeling they've already decided S.H.I.E.L.D. is a bigger entity that's been around a lot longer.
What's that? It's that Robin in Dark Knight Rises issue, right? Where we presented it that way so that you can have the big, call it S.H.I.E.L.D. moment at the end, right?
Yeah. Just for all the fans.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like 2 people in every theater cheered.
They want to give you some kind of cool Easter egg and a thing that they don't know if it's going to get sequels. And
yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people don't really know that much about Iron Man, so they're like, what's that Marvel thing we can throw in there that more people are familiar with? And yeah, I don't even think that's true, probably. You know what I mean? That, like, more people would know what S.H.I.E.L.D. is than even Iron Man. But, like, if you read comics in the 90s, you know what S.H.I.E.L.D. is.
Yeah. No, and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s a big part of Iron Man, so it makes sense to put him there.
Like, yeah. But it's weird to not call them that from the beginning. And it's also weird to have... it's so backwards to go... we have the lengthy name of this thing, and we just now thought to make it an acronym. Freaking every government installation has an acronym. Government outfit has an acronym.
Especially when your acronym already, like, it's already there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like they had to. It's like Coulson had to come up with the idea of the acronym as a concept.
Maybe Coulson just got punched in the head and he was like concussed. He didn't remember.
Okay, so we've only got 8 minutes left in the show, and we've pretty much just talked about 2008. So
we basically only talked about Iron Man.
The Iron Man and, like, sort of Dark Knight little bit.
It's gonna be like a 30-part.
It's gonna be so long. Well, we debated for 15 minutes about the realism of Dark Knight, and you're right. I was honestly going too much off of just what that felt like in 08 in the theater, where, like, I was surprised by the realism of Iron Man.
Well, and that was just...
That's the thing. This is more about Iron Man than it is Dark Knight, where, like, I went to Iron Man and I went, oh, he's like in war in Afghanistan. Like, I was really surprised by it. And the way it's shot and everything was just less stylized than I expected them to go, but it was a choice that I respected, especially in comparing DC and Marvel classically, where I was like, I like that it feels as, like in my backyard as it does, because that seems right for Marvel. Yeah,
absolutely. No, like I said, I remember all the talk around Dark Knight being like, oh man, like, this isn't a superhero movie. This is, like, they made it into a real movie, like, with real people,
Yeah, well, and with Dark Knight, it always felt like a quote-unquote real movie just because of the ideas that it's exploring and the performances
Mm-hmm.
and the brand of spectacle. Like you'd never had a thing based on a superhero comic where we flipped a physical 18-wheeler in the middle of a street like that.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's cool.
I'm not saying that makes it a good movie. I'm saying that all of a sudden it's like on the level of a James Bond thing, and we hadn't had that really. Besides, I mean, the Superman movies felt that epic.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, or at least closer.
Yeah, absolutely. No, one flips over a tanker truck and the other one blows up a tank, It was something in the air.
I think the reason we've taken this long is
Hulk.
Those two movies are obviously so foundational, but also it's endlessly fascinating to compare them, I think. To talk about them together, and again, the way they changed things. One is a sequel in an ongoing franchise that was, again, heralded as like the second coming of Christ, and that people seem to almost forget was even a sequel. Like they could have started with that. And Iron Man was the beginning of something, and nobody knew if it was going to go anywhere, if it was just going to be, Daredevil or Ghost Rider again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just fascinating that they both came out the same summer. I think the other reason that it's so significant that this happened the way it did is because we never had two movies of that. I mean, of that caliber, really. Anyway, but we never had two movies of that scale that had that much public interest from the two studios at the same time. That had not happened before.
And never happened again.
Well, they kept trying to make that happen again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would have. I mean, forget for a second the quality of it and how much money it made. It became a kind of standard thing once you got to the DCEU that both companies were trying to put out a certain number of movies every year, right? Like
mm-hmm.
it didn't work out for DCEU a lot. They kept having to change dates and cancel projects and all of
the classic
that stuff. But you had a number of years where you still got like at least one, if not multiple, movies from both studios. I don't know if you had a year before that where you had two movies that came out by both or one movie by both studios. Did you? Even of any kind? Did that happen?
You would have had it in 2005 with Begins, no? Because there's a Marvel movie I think that comes out in 2005.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. But it's also between like 4 different studios at that point.
Yeah.
So that's not an interesting thing to even try to figure out, right? Like once you got MCU and people are thinking like Marvel movies.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're talking about just all the studios, then we're really going to hit it big in 2012 when you have a Spider-Man movie, The Avengers, and Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, that's a good call. Did we ever get all 4? Did we ever get like a thing made by Marvel Studios and a thing made by DC, and then a Spider-Man and an X-Men? Did that ever happen?
We're close. We got 3 of the 4 in 2014.
Oh, that's true. Help me out with 14. You had Winter Soldier, you had and Guardians, you had Days of Future Past,
Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Days of Future Past.
Amazing Spider-Man 2. So
depending on if you want to count it as Sony, you can say 2017 because you got Logan, Spider-Man: Homecoming for Sony, the rest of the MCU turnout, and Justice League and Wonder Woman.
Oh wow! I can't believe you did that off the top of your head. So what you're missing in 14 is a Superman or a Batman?
You're just missing a DC thing, yeah.
Of any kind, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny because when Man of Steel came out, briefly, Warner's was talking like they were going to try to rush a sequel out for the following year. Which was hilarious. And then it took them 3.
Yeah, it took them a while to get a sequel to Man of Steel off the ground.
Yep, and we all know how that turned out.
Yep, we'll get there.
Wait to get to that.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Oh wait, no, I already said 2017 is the one that worked. Okay, never mind.
You
'Cause I was
did,
gonna
yeah.
say there was also No, because that's 2016.
2016, and then
Now,
Deadpool 2 is
see, now
2018.
I'm all
So
messed up.
wait, so what were the ones you brought up for 17? You had Wonder Woman.
Yeah, Wonder Woman, Justice League, Ragnarok, Guardians 2, Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Homecoming. But there's not an X-Men.
You got Logan.
Logan. Oh, Logan is 2017. Okay, so you're right. You got that quadruple punch there.
Mm-hmm.
Well done.
Yeah, that might be the only time we've had the quadruple punch.
No, that was fun. So we are at an hour. Real quick, just kind of cheating to put a wrap up on this, since all we talked about were those two movies. In that year, we were hoping
one of them.
we were hoping to get to 12 by this point. Yeah, we mostly just talked about Iron Man.
I jokingly said 12 is like we're gonna make it real far. Like 12, we couldn't even get there.
No, we
haven't even finished 2008 because there's still Hulk and Hellboy 2. Those existed. There, I threw them out.
Yeah, that's true. We don't really have to talk that hard about that, except to say with Incredible Hulk, there was a concerted effort to make that tonally very distinct from Iron Man and feel enough like it's in the same universe, but not a picture perfect duplicate of the same kind of thing. Like, it's a different kind of movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Incredible Hulk is, I think to this day, the most I've liked Hulk in a movie, and like the coolest Hulk as a character has been in a movie.
Yeah, I just appreciate, like, one of these. They have connective tissue because they both involve the military and there's war elements, but one of them is sort of a war movie, and the other one is a fugitive film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there comes a point where it gets harder and harder to pigeonhole an MCU movie into a different genre. And I've always said that, by and large, there are obviously exceptions, and I love a good, just straight up superhero movie where the genre is superhero. Most of our best superhero movies fit in a different genre first. And MCU, you could do that with through the first couple of phases at least. And then there comes a point where superficially you can, but does it, like, is Black Widow really a spy thriller? No, it's not.
No, you hit a certain point where it's like, these are the genres we're in. Dan makes fun of that a lot with the Spider-Man movies being John Hughes movies, where it's like, you say that, but
yeah,
not really.
They're not really.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But yeah, real quick, what do you think are, just very broadly, the biggest takeaways that movies into the 2010s at large, like looking at the influence that those two movies have on filmmaking? What do you think are just kind of the big influences on movies from Dark Knight and Iron Man? Because one of them for Dark Knight, I think, is just score. Like, we cannot get away from that in superhero movies and everything else.
Just in general, the freaking Zimmer scores. No, you have that. I would say the biggest takeaway that pop culture had on The Dark Knight is the stupid, the villain wanted to be caught.
Yeah, we can't get away from
cliche.
That. Skyfall does it. And I keep talking about...
does it.
Yeah, oh, that's true, too.
Mm-hmm.
You've even got MCU ripping off Dark Knight.
Yeah, exactly. Goyer did the Call of Duty of 2012 as well, and he wrote that into it because of course he did.
I would say with Iron Man, some of it is just like jokey, conceited, full of themselves protagonists.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, that's how you get stuff like Green Lantern.
Yeah, like, I think superhero movies especially really want to recreate the success of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, with that, it's more so just trying to capture, what it led to. And I think what helps Dark Knight having more of a specific. Oh, um, yeah, I didn't have that thought until I just saw Pushy DX mention the big blue sky laser.
Yeah.
Um, that's like a big thing after Iron Man.
Yeah, well, he said they stopped doing the big blue sky laser. I
No,
don't know what he
he
means by
did.
that.
That's what he said in the chat, but I think of this as kind of the start of it.
Yeah, no, I did too.
It's just funny because it's like you get the big blue sky laser, but it's not, like a big important. I mean, it is an important plot thing because it's how you kill the villain, but we typically use that as like the villain's plan, and it becomes more of a thing.
Yeah, well, and at this point, we're cheating. By the way, we've gone over time, but I felt bad that we only talked about that one thing. I always think of what he's calling the big blue sky laser as a thing we stole from the climax of like supernatural horror movies. And like superhero movies stole that, and then they kept running with it. Not always beam in the sky, but you have a lot of horror adjacent movies that have that have some kind of like vortex or something that opens up at the end of it, like Ghostbusters, Poltergeist, things like that. And then at some point, superhero movies couldn't stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always reminded of Poltergeist when we do that stuff.
Yeah, and we'll get that in Avengers, but Avengers, it's weird because they're a year apart, but Avengers is like really Transformers 3, like to the point where like I kind of question it a little bit because there's a lot of stuff that's like between both
You
of
always
them.
say that, and I don't know that movie well enough to have ever made that connection, but
Mm-hmm. No, they've got like the same climax where the villain opens up a portal and like their armies come in, and you have like the big portal in the sky that they have to shut down,
yeah.
and you have like big whale things flying around. Like it goes to design in a few places.
Well,
It's
and I
really weird.
think you get this weird regurgitation thing that can happen where you can point back to where something starts, but it doesn't mean that that's the main influence, right? So
No, of
when
course.
when DCEU can't get away from Sky Laser, that's because of
That's
Avengers.
because of Avengers, absolutely.
When
Yeah.
when Ninja Turtles 2014 does it, that's because of Avengers.
Mhm,
You see what I'm saying?
mhm.
I,
Well,
I
same with Amazing Spider-Man. Oh no, because they're the same year. What am I talking about?
Well,
I don't know.
and again, it was a thing already, but people didn't start talking about it until mid 2010s, and I was already complaining about it in rewinds, and then people started noticing it because it was in everything.
Mhm.
I but I saw it as an irritating trope. I think even before Avengers was doing it.
Mhm.
And then I also just wanted to mention real quick that and this will probably be kind of a good setup for our 2010s discussion, where Iron Man really sets the foundation for what the MCU is going to be, and they are very prosperous in taking, I think, the right lessons for the most part from what they learned making that movie
Mhm.
for a while, right?
Yeah.
And the success of Dark Knight really hampered DC creatively
Mhm.
and messed with what the DCEU could have been because they didn't go for new blood right away.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I just kind of wanted to make that point and kind of put a pin in that because I if I mean, who knows if we ever would have gotten DCEU shared universe, all of that, without the success of Dark Knight. But all things being equal, if they still later on get creative and decide they want to do that kind of thing, and they just start from scratch like they almost did with Justice League Mortal, they probably would have been in better shape than let's kind of try to ham fist. Nolan into being a producer for a movie he doesn't even seem that interested in, and let's bring Goyer back to write it, and let's have the same person score it, et cetera, et cetera. We started that from completely the wrong place, where like Man of Steel wants to begins in Dark Knight.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you know, we even went with the moniker title again, like Dark Knight.
Yeah, exactly. And people think of that as a, more stylized, less grounded movie, but I think it wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought if that movie could have its way, it would be in the same universe as Dark Knight, and like it's in Rises, and that it's almost in denial about the fact that it can't be.
Well, and I remember there being so much talk when they announced Batman versus Superman that they would link the two.
Oh, I don't remember anybody talking about that. I thought we were kind of that ship had sailed, and nobody
Oh no,
nobody trusted that at that point.
There was lots of talk that we would do like the the Robin John Blake Batman thing, or Christian Bale would have to come back, especially because we already knew at that point that they were going for a Dark Knight Returns thing, because that's how they announced it.
Right.
So a lot of people made the jump of, okay, well, you just had...
Oh, you know what? Now that you're saying that...
Returns-y Batman with Dark Knight Rises.
You must have heard more of it than I did, because I just remember, kind of some silly fringe, discussion of like, oh, what if it's Rob? Like, shut up. It's not going to be that. Okay, well, there's your part 4, folks. We talked about superhero movie history for just over an hour again, and we got through 2008. Tune in next time where we'll talk about Zack Snyder's Watchmen. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan. This was Austin, the Day Ghost. We appreciate you guys. As always, on anything that we call Superhero Rewind, I want to say thanks to all of our Rewind producers, and read them by name. That's a perk that you get if you join the $10 tier or above, and that makes you a Superhero Rewind producer and part of the Rewind selection board. We will be back. By the way, let me just mention real quick, for those of you watching this in real time, in a couple weeks now for the next Rewind commentaries. We're having to put that off a week because my schedule got weird next week. But Austin, would you just remind everybody what our 2 movies for the next double feature are going to be? Do you know what they are?
It's Blade and Batman versus Dracula.
There you go. He's got it. Those are the movies that we'll be doing in a couple weeks on the Superhero Rewind commentary project. And I'll just read these down real quick, folks. Thanks to all of our patrons, but especially our Patreon producers, including One Reply, Bill Mills, Chewbacca's Lover, Dr. Hello, Elliot Slater, Goosta123, Hayden Spring, Joe Turner, Jajira, MattBat68, Michael Martin, Thomas Edgehill, Adam March, Damon Begay, Hot Soup, Jacob Schneider, Jonathan Campbell, Justin Hayes, Kareem Roberts, Matthew Brody, Michael Austin Gulick, Michael Rodriguez, this guy, The Day Ghost, Unknown Passenger, and Wendell Jones. And in the meantime, once again, I was Captain Logan, and this was Austin, the Day Ghost.
Yep. We'll be back to talk about how DC capitalized on 2008 with, like you said, Watchmen and Jonah Hex.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, I'm sorry. I was going to close out, but you just made me think of something. Were there any...
remember Jonah Hex exists?
Were there any other superhero movies in 2008?
Yeah, Hulk and...
we did talk
Hellboy
about
2.
that. I'm sorry, what was the other thing you said?
Hellboy 2.
Okay, there you go.
Which people complain is having... no, I don't think it fully bombed, but like it was...
It got a little buried.
Yeah, it got a little buried.
Yeah. Now, I don't think that would have been that much bigger than the first Hellboy, even if it hadn't gotten buried by those movies. I think that was already a very, cult niche kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, I hate to say because they're great. Like, don't get me wrong, yeah. I love those movies, but they weren't for everybody.
Yeah. No, and I think Hellboy 2 is like a substantial leap over the first one.
I do, too. I like that movie quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
We have to throw these things in so that people don't think that so that people can't say that all we did was talk about the mainstream stuff.
No, and I love Hellboy. It's, I think, maybe my favorite comic book series, if not, in the top 5.
And I think Del Toro is probably influential in general on those kind of broader comic book movies. Just his style of filmmaking at large. Like, you can't tell me Gunn's not looking at that at all.
Oh, yeah. No, if anything, I wish he was more influential overall. But yeah, I think Gunn likes Del Toro. Absolutely.
I would think so. Okay,
Maybe
well, anyway,
he'll get Del Toro to do something. Who knows?
it'd be cool if that was the guy they got. If they decide to make more Guardians, it'd be cool if that was the guy that did it.
That would be weird.
Wouldn't it? It'd be cool though.
I mean, yeah,
He could make a Guardians movie. That'd be cool.
But it would be weird. But, yeah, go for it.
We can't stop doing the show. We're gonna get going now, and we'll see you soon for another one. Bye, everybody.
See ya, everybody.